Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. Snow White and the Seven Warriors. The kingdom did not fall in a day. It rotted, slowly, like a beautiful apple blighted from within by a single, perfect worm. That worm was the queen. We did not call her evil to her face, of course. We whispered it in the dark, a prayer and a curse rolled into one. She was our ruler, our terror, and our damnation. And her beauty was a weapon sharper than any sword. I remember it, even now. The way the court fell silent when she entered, a symphony of frozen awe. Her skin was paler than moonlight, her hair a cascade of obsidian, and her lips were the red of freshly spilled blood. She was ageless, timeless, preserved by a dark magic that fed on the very soul of our land. The fields grew barren, the rivers ran thin, and the people grew thin with them, all to sustain her terrible, eternal youth. I was the only one who stood in her way. Not because I was brave, but because of an accident of birth. I was Snow White, the true queen's daughter, the last flicker of an extinguished hearth. My mother had been light and song. The queen was silence and shadow. And I was a reminder of what she had usurped. It happened on the night of the blood moon. The air itself tasted of metal and magic. I was in my chambers, the ones that grew colder and more barren with each passing season, when the scent of poisoned roses first tickled my throat. It was a cloying, sweet smell that promised a painless sleep. A death wrapped in velvet. I knew it instantly. I had spent my life learning the language of her poisons. My heart did not pound, it simply went still, a bird frozen mid-flight. She's finally done it, I thought, the clarity of the doomed washing over me. The door to my room was locked from the outside. The window, 100-foot drop to the jagged rocks below. I was a bird in a gilded cage, and the serpent had come to coil at the door. But a caged bird still has claws. I tore the heavy drapes from my bed, my fingers fumbling, slick with cold sweat. I could hear the soft, rhythmic tread of her personal guard in the marble hall. They were giving the poison time to work. I knotted the fabric with a strength I didn't know I possessed, tying one end to the stone leg of my bed, throwing the other out into the churning night. It was a pathetic rope, a thread of hope against the certainty of death. The climb was a blur of tearing nails and burning muscles. The wind snatched at my white nightgown, whipping it around my legs like a shroud. I did not look down. I focused on the cold, rough stone, on the next handhold, on the next breath that didn't smell of roses. I reached a lower battlement, my body trembling, and dropped onto the cold stone just as the door to my chamber splintered inward. I heard a curse, sharp and guttural, and then the baying of hounds. They had my scent. I ran. Through the deserted upper courtyards, past fountains that had long since run dry. The castle, my home, had become a labyrinth of treachery. Every shadow held a knife. Every friendly face I had once trusted was now a potential betrayer. I moved like a ghost through the skeletal remains of my mother's gardens, the thorns of dead roses tearing at my skin and clothes, leaving thin, bloody trails. A fitting tribute, I thought wildly. Let the roses have their taste. The forest was my only hope. The dark wood. A place so ancient and feared that even the queen's power seemed to waver at its edge. It was a living entity of gnarled oak and grasping thorn, where sunlight went to die and legends were born from the nightmares of men. No one who entered ever returned. It was a death sentence. But it was a sentence I would choose, rather than the one she offered. I reached the tree line, my lungs screaming, the baying of the hounds so close I could feel their hot breath on the air. I risked a glance back. The castle spires pierced the blood moon's swollen belly, a silhouette of jagged teeth against a bruised sky. It was not a home. It was a tomb. There. The tree-lean, a soldier shouted, his armor glinting with malevolent fire in the red light. This was it. The end of one life, the violent birth of another. I turned my back on my past, on my title, on everything I had ever known. I took a final, shuddering breath of the tainted castle air, and then I plunged into the absolute darkness of the dark wood. The cold was the first shock. It was not the chill of winter, but something deeper, a cold that seeped into the marrow of your bones and whispered of forgotten things. The sounds of my pursuers vanished as if swallowed by a great beast. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the crunch of my bare feet on frost-rimed leaves. Branches, like skeletal fingers, snatched at my hair and clothes. The world shrunk to the next step, and the next. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that perpetual twilight. My feet were numb, cut and bleeding. My thin nightgown was in tatters, offering no protection. I stumbled into a small clearing where a single, sickly beam of moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating a patch of black mushrooms that seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. Exhaustion claimed me. My legs gave way and I collapsed against the massive, twisted root of an ancient oak. Tears, hot and shameful, finally came. They were not tears of self-pity, but of rage. Rage at the Queen, at my own helplessness, at the cruel fate that had made me a pawn in this game of thrones. I was so consumed by it that I didn't hear the subtle shift in the silence. The forest had been watching, and now it had decided to speak. A twig snapped. My head jerked up, every muscle tensed. The tears froze on my cheeks. I saw nothing but shifting shadows and the grotesque shapes of the trees. But I felt it. A presence. Ancient, weary, and dangerously aware of me. From the deepest gloom, a figure emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a man carved from the very shadows of the wood. He wore worn leather armor and a long, gray cloak that made him part of the mist. In his hand was a sword, not gleaming and ceremonial, but nicked and scarred from 100 battles. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his gaze upon me, a physical weight, assessing, hostile, and utterly without mercy. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, a sentinel of this forgotten place, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the forest air, that I had not escaped one death only to find safety. I had merely traded the Queen's poison for his steel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird once more. I was Snow White, heir to a broken throne, covered in dirt and blood, alone in the dark with a man who was more wolf than human. And the story, it seemed, was only just beginning. The world narrowed to the point of his sword. It was an extension of the man, of the forest itself, unyielding, deadly, and silent. He took a step forward, his boots making no sound on the damp earth. The air grew thicker, charged with a lethal tension. I scrambled backward, my raw heels digging into the leaf litter, until the gnarled root of the oak pressed hard against my spine. There was nowhere left to run. "This is how it ends," a voice, cold and resigned, whispered inside me. Not in a throne room, but in the dirt. Not with a proclamation, but with a silent stroke. But the part of me that had torn down drapes and climbed into the abyss, the part that was my mother's daughter, rebelled. I would not die cowering. Slowly, forcing my trembling limbs to obey, I pushed myself to my feet. I stood before him, a ragged princess in a torn nightgown, and met the shadow where his eyes should be. "If you are going to kill me," I said, my voice a ragged scrape, but clear in the suffocating silence, "then do it. But know that my blood on your blade will be a message to the queen that her prize was stolen. She will not rest until she has scoured this forest and everyone in it from the face of the earth." It was a bluff, a desperate gamble spun from the threads of courtly intrigue I had been forced to learn. I had nothing to offer but a threat. He went perfectly still. The sword did not waver. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the frantic drum of my heart in my own ears. Then, a low, guttural voice, rough with disuse, broke the silence. It was not from the swordsman. "She speaks of the sorceress queen." A second man emerged from the trees to my left, moving with a liquid grace that spoke of a different kind of danger. He was leaner, dressed in dark, practical clothes that clung to a wiry frame. A series of knives were strapped to his chest and thighs, and his eyes, a sharp, calculating green, missed nothing. "The rogue." "I heard the hounds," the rogue said, his gaze sweeping over me from head to toe, a cynical smile playing on his lips. "A royal hunt, deep in our woods. You're the one they're after. The little princess who talks of blood and messages." The swordsman remained a statue, but his head tilted a fraction, his attention now divided between me and his companion. "She's more trouble than she's worth, Killian," the rogue said, addressing the silent warrior. "A pretty burden. Leave her for the wolves. They'll leave less of a mess." Killian. So the silent one had a name. Killian's gaze returned to me, heavier than before. I could feel it, a tangible pressure weighing my worth, my truth, my very soul. I saw the calculation in the stillness of his body, the easy solution, the clean cut. My life hung in the balance of his silence. I took a shaky step forward, directly into the space between his sword and my death. "I am not a burden," I said, the words feeling like a vow. "I am the rightful queen of this land. The queen who sits on my throne murdered my father and has bled my kingdom dry with her dark magic. I have nothing. No army, no allies, no hope. But I have a cause. And I am not afraid to die for it." I looked directly into the shadows of Killian's face, willing him to see the fire that the cold and the fear had not been able to extinguish. But I would rather live to see her fall. The rogue let out a short, harsh laugh. "A cause? We have our own causes, princess. They involve staying alive and staying hidden. Your cause smells like a pyre." But Killian moved. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible. He lowered his sword, the tip now pointing at the ground. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't acceptance. It was a stay of execution. He turned his head slightly towards the rogue and gave a single, sharp jerk of his chin back the way they had come. The rogue, whose name I would later learn was Finn, sighed dramatically. "Oh, splendid. The ghost has spoken. Come on, then, Your Majesty." His tone was thick with sarcasm. "Try to keep up. The wolves in this part of the wood are particularly fond of royal flesh." Killian turned and melted back into the trees without a backward glance. Finn gave me a mocking bow and followed. For a moment, I stood frozen, disbelief warring with a fragile, terrifying spark of hope. They weren't going to kill me. Not yet. I looked back one last time toward the edge of the forest, toward the life that had tried to murder me. There was nothing for me there. Taking a deep breath of the cold, pine-scented air, I turned my back on the past and followed the two warriors, the silent sentinel and the cynical thief, deeper into the heart of the darkness. The path they took was no path at all. It was a treacherous maze of roots and thorns, of hidden streams and sudden, sheer drops. Killian moved like a wraith, his form blending with the shadows, always just visible ahead. Finn moved with a predator's ease, occasionally glancing back to ensure I hadn't fallen behind or been snatched away. I stumbled, my bare feet screaming in protest with every step. The cold was a constant, gnawing presence. But I bit my lip until I tasted blood and forced myself onward. I would not give Finn the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not give Killian a reason to reconsider his decision. After what felt like an eternity, the forest began to change. The trees grew even larger, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked out the sky completely. We arrived at a massive, ancient fortress tree, its trunk so wide it could have housed a small cottage. Vines thick as a man's arm draped from its limbs, creating a natural curtain. Killian pushed aside a heavy curtain of ivy, revealing a hidden entrance. A faint, warm glow emanated from within, along with the low murmur of voices. He gestured for me to enter. Hesitating for only a heartbeat, I stepped through the veil of green and into the heart of the seven. The inside was not a cave, but a sanctuary, carved by time and cunning into the base of the great tree. A small fire pit in the center cast flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls, which were adorned with worn weapons, simple bedrolls, and the practical detritus of men who lived on the edge of the world. And there, in the firelight, were the rest of them. A massive man with a fearsome scar running from his temple to his jaw looked up from honing a broadsword, his eyes, one a clear, piercing blue, the other milky and blind, narrowing at the sight of me. The commander. A younger man with a bow resting easily across his knees and the keen, focused gaze of a hunter, the archer. An older man with gentle hands sorting dried herbs, the healer. A lanky figure scribbling in a tattered journal, the poet. And a final man, sitting apart from the others, his fingers tracing patterns in the air that seemed to catch the light, his eyes holding a depth of knowledge that made my skin prickle, the mage. All conversation ceased. 7 pairs of eyes, each holding a universe of pain, of loss, of hard-won survival, fixed on me. I stood in the center of their circle, a foreign creature, a disruption to their fragile peace. I was utterly exposed, more naked in that moment than I had been in my torn nightgown in the forest. The scarred commander was the first to break the silence, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Killian," he said, his single good eye never leaving me. "What is this?" Killian said nothing. He simply walked to the far side of the chamber and leaned against the wall, folding his arms, his message clear: she is your problem now. Finn flopped down onto a pile of furs with a grin. Gentlemen, he announced, meet the reason the Queen's hounds are baying at our door. May I present Snow White? The rightful queen, or so she claims. The air in the sanctuary turned to ice. I felt their hostility like a physical blow. I was danger. I was death. I was the end of their self-imposed exile. I straightened my shoulders, ignoring the way my body trembled with exhaustion and cold. I met the commander's gaze and saw the reflection of my own desperate courage in his one good eye. My name is Snow White, I said, my voice echoing in the hushed space. And I need your help. The silence that followed my plea was heavier than Killian's sword. It was a weight of shared history, of collective suspicion. I stood in the center of their sanctuary, a flickering, half-dead thing dragged in from the storm, and asked these broken men to step back into the fire. The commander, whose name was Ronan, rose to his full height. He was a mountain of a man, his shoulders broad, his presence dominating the space. The scar that carved through his face was a brutal roadmap of a past he'd rather forget. His good eye, the color of a winter sky, scanned me from head to toe, missing no detail: the shredded nightgown, the bloody feet, the dirt smeared on my cheeks like war paint. Help, he repeated, the word a flat, disbelieving stone dropped into the quiet. He took a step toward me, and the others seemed to hold their breath. Finn watched with amused detachment, the archer with cold assessment, the healer with wary pity. The mage's gaze was unreadable, his fingers still tracing those faint, shimmering patterns in the air. The poet had stopped writing, his quill poised above the page, waiting for the next line of this unexpected tragedy. You bring the Queen's wrath to our doorstep, Ronan continued, his voice low and dangerous. You endanger the one place we have found refuge, and you speak of help. He stopped a few feet from me, close enough that I could smell the leather and steel and cold wind on him. You are a child playing at war. Anger, hot and bright, flared through my exhaustion. I am no child. I have lived my entire life in the viper's nest of her court. I have learned to spot poison in my wine and a knife in a smile. I have survived an assassination attempt this very night. I am still standing. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, refusing to be cowed by his size, his scars, his bitterness. What have you done but hide? A collective intake of breath hissed through the chamber. I had crossed a line. I had spoken the unspoken truth that festered in this tree-root fortress. Ronan's face darkened, the scar standing out livid and white against his skin. For a terrifying second, I thought he would strike me. But his hand, clenched into a fist at his side, remained still. We have fought our wars, princess. We have bled for kings and causes. And we were rewarded with betrayal, with dishonor, with exile. His gaze swept around the room, including each of the men in his statement. This hiding, as you call it, is the piece we carved with our own broken blades. We will not trade it for a lost cause and a pretty face. It is not a trade, I shot back, my voice trembling with a passion that felt like it might tear me apart. It is a chance. A chance to reclaim what was stolen. Not just my throne, but the soul of this kingdom. The fields are barren because she drains their life. The people are starving because she feeds on their despair. She is a cancer, and I am the knife. But I cannot cut her out alone. From the shadows, the healer, a man named Cade, spoke softly. A knife that is used alone is often broken, my lady. Then let me be broken for something that matters. The words were a raw cry, torn from the deepest part of me. The defiance finally cracked, and the utter loneliness and terror of the night rushed in. A single, traitorous tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, ashamed. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Ronan's intense stare did not soften, but it shifted. He was no longer looking at a political problem, he was looking at a person. A stubborn, desperate, bleeding person. The mage, Elrian, spoke for the first time, his voice like the rustle of ancient pages. The bloodline of the true kings, it was said to hold an old magic. A magic of life, not decay. His luminous eyes met mine. The forest, it has not rejected you. It has let you pass. That is not a small thing. Killian, from his post by the wall, gave a single, slow nod. A confirmation. Ronan's gaze flickered between Elrian and Killian, a silent conversation passing between them. He let out a long, weary breath, the sound of a man shouldering a burden he thought he'd laid down for good. He looked at me again, and for the first time I saw not a commander judging a princess, but a soldier assessing a recruit. Finn says you kept up on the path here, he stated. Is that true? Finn shrugged, a grudging respect in his tone. Didn't cry once. Stumbled, but didn't fall. Ronan's good, I held mine. Your feet are bleeding. You're shaking from cold and exhaustion. You have the look of a corpse. But there is still fire in you. He paused, the fate of kingdoms hanging on his next words. We will not fight your war for you. My heart plummeted. But, he continued, his voice gruff, you may stay. 1 week. You will eat our food, you will follow our rules, and you will train. You will learn what it means to not be a princess. You will learn to hold a sword, to track a deer, to survive. At the end of that week, I will decide if the fire is worth the inferno it will summon. It wasn't an alliance. It was a trial. A test of my will, my spirit, my very mettle. It was more than I had dared hope for minutes ago. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Ronan turned to the healer. Cade. See to her feet. Then he addressed the group, his command ringing with finality. This changes nothing. We remain vigilant. Finn, double the watch on the perimeter. As the men moved to obey, the spell was broken. I was no longer a momentary disruption. I was a project. A question. I stood there, swaying slightly, as Kate approached with a bowl of water and clean cloths. Ronan paused beside me on his way to the fire. He did not look at me, but his words were for my ears alone, a low, gravelly whisper that carried the weight of a vow and a warning. Do not mistake this for kindness, Snow White. This is the last chance I will give you to walk away alive. Prove yourself a weapon, or you will become a casualty. Then he was gone, leaving me with the gentle healer and the terrifying, exhilarating understanding that my first battle had already begun. It was not a battle of swords, but of spirit. and I could not afford to lose. The first days were a special kind of agony. Cade, the healer, had cleaned and bandaged my feet with a quiet efficiency, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man with such calloused hands. He'd given me a salve that smelled of pine and mint, which cooled the fire in my cuts almost instantly. He also provided me with practical, worn leathers and a tunic that had belonged to a much smaller warrior from a past life. Dressed in the clothes of a dead man, I felt like a ghost learning to live again. My training began at dawn, under Ronan's unblinking, critical eye. The sword he gave me was a heavy, blunt piece of iron, a far cry from the ceremonial rapiers I'd seen at court. My arm screamed in protest after the first few parries. He was a merciless instructor, his commands barked, his corrections physical and sharp. "Your stance is a prayer for death," he'd growl, kicking my feet wider. "You hold the sword like it's a bouquet. It is not for giving. It is for taking. Taking life." Each day was a lesson in humiliation and endurance. Lysander, the archer, tried to teach me the bow. My hands were too soft, my arms too weak. The string snapped against my inner arm, leaving angry red welts. "You don't pull the string with your arm," he said, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to Ronan's thunder. "You pull it with your back. It's about alignment. Patience." I had neither. Finn, the rogue, taught me to move silently. He'd scatter dry leaves and twigs and have me walk a path. Every crackle, every rustle, was met with his mocking commentary. "A blind badger could track you, princess. You walk like you're still on a marble floor, announcing your arrival to the world." He showed me how to place the ball of my foot first, to feel the earth, to become a part of its soundscape. It was a frustrating, painstaking process. Through it all, Killian was a silent, watchful shadow. He never offered instruction, never spoke a word. But I could feel his gaze during my drills, a constant, unnerving pressure. Sometimes, I would catch him looking at me from across the camp, his expression unreadable, but intense. It wasn't the hostile assessment of Ronan or the cynical amusement of Finn. It was something else, something that made a different kind of heat bloom in my chest, a confusing mix of fear and fascination. The only respite was in the evenings. Cade would share stories of the herbs he used, his voice a soothing balm. Alastair, the poet, would sometimes recite verses, his words painting pictures of lost loves and forgotten battles that hung in the firelit air like smoke. And Elrian, the mage, would simply sit, his presence a quiet hum of power, occasionally making the flames dance with a subtle twitch of his finger. One evening, a week into my trial, I was attempting to sharpen my blunt practice sword with a whetstone, my hands raw and bleeding anew. The rhythmic, grating sound was the only noise I was capable of making. Ronan was across the fire, watching me, his arms crossed. The others were engaged in their own quiet tasks. "You're holding it wrong." The voice was low, rough, and so close it made me jump. Killian. He had moved without a sound and now stood beside me. He knelt, his presence so large it seemed to consume the space around us. He didn't look at me, but at the stone in my hand. "The angle is too steep. You'll dull the edge, not sharpen it." He took the stone from my unresisting grip. His fingers, calloused and scarred, brushed against mine, and a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. He demonstrated, moving the stone along the blade's edge in a smooth, fluid motion. Like this. A shallow angle. Consistent. He handed the stone back. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I tried to mimic his movement, but my hand was shaking. His own hand, large and warm, closed over mine, steadying it. He guided my movements, his body a solid wall of heat at my back. I could feel the whisper of his breath against my hair. The world narrowed to the feel of his hand on mine, the rasp of the stone on steel, the frantic beat of my own pulse. It was the first truly kind, unasked-for gesture anyone had offered me since my world had ended. "There," he murmured, his voice a vibration I felt through my entire body. "You feel it?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod, my throat impossibly tight. It lasted only a moment. He released my hand and stood, retreating back into the shadows as silently as he had come. But the ghost of his touch remained, a brand on my skin. Later that night, as I lay on my bedroll, staring at the intricate rootwork of the ceiling, I replayed the moment. The sheer, shocking warmth of him. The safety I'd felt, however briefly, in his presence. It was a dangerous thought. He was a warrior, broken and silent. I was a princess with a death sentence. Our alliance was as fragile as morning frost. A soft sound made me turn my head. Ronan was standing over me. "You have a determination I did not expect," he said, his voice low so as not to wake the others. "You are still terrible with a sword. But you are less terrible than you were." It was the closest I would get to praise. "The week is not over," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "No. It is not." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the entrance, where Killian kept watch. "He sees something in you. Killian, he does not waste his silence on lost causes." Ronan's single good eye returned to me, and in its wintry depths, I saw a flicker of something that might have been respect. "Tomorrow, we begin your real training. Get some sleep." He moved away, leaving me with a new, terrifying hope. The forge of the broken was remaking me. I was no longer just a princess in exile. I was becoming something harder, sharper. A weapon. And as I closed my eyes, the memory of Killian's hand on mine was the only warmth in the cold, dark night. The real training was a descent into a new kind of hell. Ronan no longer focused on the basics of stance and grip, he began to teach me how to kill. He showed me the vulnerable points on a body, the soft hollow at the throat, the space between the ribs, the artery in the inner thigh. The lessons were clinical, brutal, and left me feeling stained. "You hesitate," he would snarl, after I failed to drive my blunted sword into a painted mark on a practice dummy with sufficient force. "In that moment of hesitation, you die. The Queen's soldiers will not hesitate. They will carve you open and hang your entrails from the castle walls as a warning." I learned to push past the revulsion. I learned to channel the memory of the poisoned roses, the baying hounds, the cold certainty of the assassin's approach. My strikes became faster, harder. The blunted sword began to feel like an extension of my own rage. Lysander took me hunting. It was one thing to shoot at a stationary target, another to track a living creature, to hold your breath as you drew the bowstring, and to take a life to sustain your own. The first time I brought down a snow hare, My hands trembled so violently I could barely retrieve the arrow. Lysander said nothing, merely field-dressed the animal with swift, efficient movements and handed me the warm, bloody meat. "This is the cost of survival, my lady," he said, his voice quiet. "Never forget it." Through it all, the silent understanding between Killian and me grew into a tangible thing, a current running beneath the surface of our days. He never again touched me, but his eyes followed me. During sparring sessions with Ronan, his gaze was a weight I could feel, a silent critique and encouragement. When I returned from the forest, exhausted and grim from the hunt, his eyes would meet mine for a fleeting second, and I would feel a spark of recognition, of shared hardship. One afternoon, I found a small, perfectly carved wooden raven placed on my bedroll. It was sleek and beautiful, its wings folded as if in mid-flight. I knew, with a certainty that warmed me from the inside, that it was from him. A silent tribute. A recognition of the part of me that was learning to fly in this dark new world. I tucked it into the inner pocket of my tunic, a secret talisman against the despair. But not all the warriors were shifting in their allegiances. The initial hostility from Finn had softened into a grudging camaraderie, but the scarred commander, Ronan, remained a wall of granite. He saw my progress, but he also saw the disruption I caused. I overheard them arguing one night, their voices a low, tense rumble near the entrance. "A liability, Ronan," Finn was saying. "She's a spark. And this forest is full of tinder. The Queen's patrols are getting closer. They're burning villages on the forest's edge, asking questions. They know. And what would you have me do?" Ronan's voice was dangerously low. "Throw her to them? We are not butchers. We are survivors," Finn countered. "And she is a threat to that survival. The men are divided. Alistair writes sonnets about her spirit. Cade frets over her like a mother hen. Even Lysander has started calling her my lady again. And Killian." He let the sentence hang, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Killian is his own man," Ronan snapped. "And I am still the commander here. My decision stands. The decision that could get us all killed for a girl and a cause?" Finn's voice was sharp with frustration. "Is she worth it, Ronan? Look me in the eye and tell me she is worth all our lives." There was a long, heavy silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, pressed against the cold earth as I listened. This was the fragile unity I threatened. I was the stone thrown into their stagnant pond, and the ripples were turning into waves. "I do not know," Ronan finally admitted, the words sounding torn from him. "But she fights like someone who has nothing left to lose. And that is the most dangerous weapon of all. We will see this week to its end." The conversation ended, but the tension did not dissipate. It lingered in the air the next morning, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Ronan was harder on me during training, his criticisms harsher, his expectations impossibly high. It was as if he was trying to break me, to prove to himself and to Finn that I was not worth the risk. During a brutal sparring session, he disarmed me with a vicious twist of his wrist. The practice sword clattered to the stone floor, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. I stood, panting, my palms stinging, humiliation burning my cheeks. "Pathetic," he growled, his face a mask of contempt. "You are still just a girl playing with swords." A hot, Sharp retort rose to my lips, but I bit it back. Arguing was what a princess would do. I met his gaze, letting him see the fire he had tried to extinguish. Then, I slowly bent down and retrieved the sword. My knuckles were wide around the hilt. Again, I said, my voice flat and cold. Surprise flickered in his good eye. For a moment, I saw something else there, not respect, but a dawning, grim acknowledgement. He saw the weapon he was helping to forge. He saw the queen, not the princess. He raised his own sword. As we began again, my movements were sharper, fueled by a cold fury. I saw a flicker of movement from the shadows. Killian was watching. And this time, as our blades met with a loud crack, I thought I saw the faintest hint of approval in his stormy eyes. The alliance was not yet forged. It was being tempered in conflict, tested by doubt. And at the center of it all was a forbidden, silent understanding that grew stronger with every stolen glance, a desire that was both my salvation and the potential doom of everything. The week of my trial ended not with a declaration, but with bloodshed. Finn, on one of his scouting runs, returned with his face grim and a fresh cut on his arm. "The Queen's wolves are at the door," he announced, tossing a charred piece of fabric with the royal insignia onto the ground in the center of the sanctuary. They burned Oakhaven to the ground. They were asking for the pale princess with hair of night. "They're not just hunting you, princess. They're exterminating anyone who might have sheltered you." The heir left the room. Oakhaven was a small, peaceful village on the forest's edge, known for its apple orchards. Now, it was ash. Because of me. Guilt, cold and sharp, pierced through the hardened shell I had built around myself. This is the cost, I thought, Lysander's words echoing in my mind. This was the inferno Ronan had warned me about. Ronan stood, his face a granite mask. "How many?" "None were spared," Finn said, his usual cynicism replaced by a hollow anger. "The fields are salted. It's a message. The message was for me. Come out, or more will die." "We cannot stay here," Elrian, the mage, stated, his voice calm but firm. "The pattern of their search is tightening. They will find this place within days." "Then we move," Ronan commanded. "We break camp at first light. Deeper into the heartwood." "And go where?" Alastair, the poet, asked, his voice uncharacteristically sharp with fear. "Deeper into the beast's belly? We have carved a life here, however meager. A life that is now forfeit." Ronan's voice boomed through the chamber, silencing all dissent. He turned his gaze on me, and it was like being struck. "This is the reality of your war, Snow White. It is not fought in throne rooms. It is fought in the ashes of villages. It is paid for with the lives of the innocent. Are their souls worth your crown?" The question hung in the air, a challenge and an accusation. Every eye was on me. This was my true test. Not with a sword, but with the weight of a kingdom's suffering. I stepped forward, my legs feeling like water, but my voice was steady. "No," I said, the word clear and final. "No crown is worth a single one of those souls. This is no longer about my throne." I looked at each of them, the scarred commander, the cynical rogue, the silent swordsman, the gentle healer, the watchful archer, the fearful poet, the ancient mage. It is about making sure there are no more Oakhavens. It is about stopping her. If that means I die in these woods, or you all die with me, then so be it. But I will not run while she burns my people. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not hostile or suspicious. It was considering. Ronan stared at me for a long, long time. Then, he gave a single, sharp nod. Then we fight. The decision was made. The fragile alliance was sealed not with a handshake, but with the shared memory of ash and blood. That night, as the others packed what little they had, a restless energy drove me from the sanctuary. I walked to a nearby cliff edge that overlooked a vast, dark expanse of the forest. The moon was a sliver of ice in the sky. I could still smell the phantom scent of smoke. I heard his approach before I saw him. His silence had a texture I was learning to recognize. Killian came to stand beside me, his presence a solid comfort in the swirling chaos. "They died because of me," I whispered, the words torn from me by the wind. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply stood there, sharing the weight of my guilt. After a moment, he spoke, his voice rougher than usual. "They died because of her. There is a difference." I turned to look at him. In the faint moonlight, I could see the sharp planes of his face, the intensity in his eyes that was always reserved for me. "Why did you let me live that first night?" I asked, the question I had carried since the beginning finally finding its voice. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I saw the fire in your eyes. The same fire I thought I'd lost. He took a step closer, the space between us crackling with unspoken things. I have been a weapon for so long, I forgot what it was to have a cause. You remind me. My breath caught. This was more than he had ever said to anyone, I was sure of it. The air between us was thick with danger and desire. One step. That was all it would take to close the distance, to feel the solid reality of him against me. "It's forbidden," I breathed, the words a confession. Ronan said it could break the unity of the seven. "Ronan is not my keeper," Killian said, his voice a low growl. "And some things are worth breaking for." He didn't move, leaving the choice to me. The princess, the rightful queen, knew it was a tactical disaster. The woman, starved for connection and burning with a feeling she could no longer deny, didn't care. I took that step. I moved into the space before him, my head tilted back to meet his gaze. I saw the storm in his eyes, the war between his disciplined control and the raw want I felt radiating from him. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, I raised a hand and laid it against the side of his face. His skin was warm, the stubble rough against my palm. He flinched at the contact, as if my touch was both a brand and a benediction. Then, his control shattered. His hand came up to cover mine, holding it there. His other arm snaked around my waist, pulling me flush against him. There was no more space for words, for thought. There was only the frantic beating of my heart against his chest, the heat of his body searing through my clothes, and the desperate, consuming need in his eyes. His head dipped, and his lips found mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a confession, a battle all its own. It was filled with all the silence he had kept, all the fear I had borne, all the passion we had both locked away. It was fire and ice, salvation and ruin. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the world had shifted on its axis. He rested his forehead against mine, his breathing as ragged as my own. From this moment, he vowed, his voice raw with emotion, my sword is yours. My life is yours. Until the end. It was a pledge more binding than any coronation oath. We stood there on the cliff's edge, the kingdom in ruins below us, our future a tangled web of war and desire. We had found each other in the darkness, and in doing so, we had lit a fuse that would either destroy the queen or consume us all. The queen's army did not wait for us to come to them. They descended upon the heartwood like a blight, their black armor a stain against the vibrant green. The final battle was not a single, glorious clash, but a brutal, chaotic unraveling in the shadow of the queen's obsidian fortress, a structure that pulsed with a sickly, violet light at the forest's edge. Ronan's voice was a roar, cutting through the din of steel and screams. Hold the line. Archer, on the flank. Mage, shield the left. We fought not as a royal army, but as a single, desperate organism. Lysander's arrows flew with unerring accuracy, each one finding a chink in dark armor. Elrian's hands wove spells of shimmering light that shattered against the queen's dark magic, the concussive blasts throwing soldiers back like ragdolls. Finn was a whirlwind of daggers, a phantom moving through the ranks, creating openings for Alistair, who, despite his poet's heart, fought with a fierce and surprising strength, his face a mask of grim determination. Cade fought not with a sword, but with vials of blinding powder and healing salve supplied in frantic, fleeting moments behind the front lines. And Killian. He was death incarnate. A silent, graceful reaper, his sword a blur of silver, cutting a path through the queen's guard straight toward the fortress gates. I fought at his side, my own movements no longer clumsy but honed and lethal. The blood-practiced sword was gone, in my hand was a real blade, and it tasted blood. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was eclipsed by a blazing certainty. This was my destiny. This was my fight. But the queen had saved her worst for us. As we breached the outer courtyard, the ground itself erupted. Shadows, twisted and screaming, clawed their way from the earth, manifestations of her dark magic. They had no form, only hunger. One of them wrapped around Alistair. He cried out, not in pain, but in sorrow, as the shadow whispered his own darkest poetry back to him. Before anyone could reach him, he was pulled beneath the churning earth, his journal fluttering to the ground, lost. No! Cade screamed, rushing forward, but a wall of black flame erupted, cutting him off. The healer, the gentle soul, was consumed in an instant. The cost was already too high. Keep moving! Ronan bellowed, his face a grimace of pain and rage, his own armor scorched. To the throne room! We burst into the vast, cavernous chamber. There, on a throne of twisted, petrified wood, sat the queen. She was more magnificent and terrible than I remembered, her beauty a cold, perfect weapon. My dear Snow White, she purred, her voice slithering through the hall. You bring such interesting vermin into my home. The fight that followed was a whirlwind of violence. Finn engaged her personal guard, his daggers a flash of silver until a spear found his back. He fell with a grunt of surprise, his cynical green eyes going wide, then blank. Lysander provided covering fire, But a bolt of dark magic shattered his bow and threw him against the wall with a sickening crunch. He did not get up. It was down to Ronan, Killian, Elrian, and me. Ronan charged the queen with a roar, his broadsword held high. She merely flicked her wrist, and a shard of black ice shot from the air, impaling him through his chest plate. The great commander staggered, fell to one knee, and with his last breath, he looked at me, his one good eye holding not regret, but a fierce, proud fire. Then it dimmed, and he slumped to the floor. Elrian stepped forward, his own magic flaring, a shield of pure white light protecting us from her next assault. Her power is tied to the throne, Snow. The source is the throne, he cried, strain evident in his voice as he held back the crushing darkness. Killian and I moved as one. He engaged her, a furious, relentless assault that forced her to focus her magic on him. I saw my chance. I didn't run for the queen. I ran for the throne. I felt its malevolence, a cold that threatened to freeze my soul. As my hands touched the petrified wood, a vision slammed into me, my mother, the true queen, her light being snuffed out by this very darkness, a sacrifice to bind her magic to this corrupt object. My bloodline. My power. It is not darkness that opposes you, I whispered, my voice ringing with a power I didn't know I possessed. It is life. I poured everything I had into the throne, not to claim it, but to break it. The memories of sun-drenched fields, of my mother's laughter, of Cade's kindness, of Alistair's verses, of Ronan's grudging respect, of Finn's sharp wit, of Lysander's patience, and of Killian. Of his silence, his strength, his kiss. A brilliant, golden light erupted from my hands, cracking the blackened wood. The queen screamed, a sound of pure rage and terror, as her power source fractured. In that moment of her distraction, Killian lunged. His sword, gleaming with the reflected light of my magic, found her heart. She stared at him, then at me, her perfect features contorting in hatred and disbelief before she dissolved into a wisp of shadow and was gone. The silence that fell was deafening. The remaining dark soldiers faltered, their will broken, and fled. It was over. I stood, panting, my body trembling with spent power and grief. The throne was a pile of smoldering splinters. Killian stood over the queen's remains, his shoulders heaving. Elrian, the last of the seven, leaned heavily against a pillar, his face ashen. I looked around the throne room, at the fallen. My brave, broken warriors. They had given everything for a cause that was not theirs, for a queen they had chosen. The victory was ash in my mouth. They crowned me in the great hall, amidst the scars of battle that would never truly heal. The crown was cold and heavy on my brow. My first act as queen was to see to the honored burial of the fallen. Ronan, the steadfast commander. Finn, the cynical rogue. Lysander, the watchful archer. Alistair, the poetic heart. Cade, the gentle healer. Their names were carved into a monument of white stone in the courtyard, a testament to the cost of peace. The kingdom began the long, slow process of healing. The fields, freed from the queen's blight, showed the first green shoots of life. The people, though weary and scarred, looked to me with a fragile hope. Elrian became my royal mage and most trusted advisor, the last link to the brothers I had lost. And Killian became the commander of my royal guard, the silent protector at my side. The love we had forged in shadow was now our public secret, a bittersweet bond tempered by loss. We had won. The kingdom was saved. But that night, in the quiet of my chambers, now my own, not my mother's, not the evil queen's, I stood by the window. The same window I had climbed from what felt like a lifetime ago. Killian came to stand behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders, his touch the only thing that could warm the cold hollow the war had left inside me. I leaned back against him, the wooden raven he had carved for me held tightly in my hand. "We paid too high a price," I whispered, the words choked. He turned me to face him, his stormy eyes filled with a love that was as profound as his sorrow. "They chose their end, Snow. They chose you. That is a price worth paying." He kissed me then, softly, a balm on a wound that would never fully close. We had reclaimed the throne, but we ruled from a castle of ghosts. Our love was our strength, and our constant, aching reminder. The story closed not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a quiet, resolute breath. The queen was dead. The kingdom was reborn. But as I looked out over the starlit land, I knew this was not an end. It was a beginning. War and desire had forged me, and they would follow me, always. And so, the tale of Snow White and her warriors finds its close, for now. But every kingdom holds new secrets, and every crown casts a long shadow. If this story of forbidden desire, shattered loyalty, and fierce redemption moved you, if you found a home in the dark heart of the Darkwood and among its broken exiles, then your journey does not have to end here. Subscribe to the channel, and join our fellowship. Your support ensures that more epic tales like this one can be whispered from the shadows. Let us know that the fire within this story burned bright for you. Leave a comment below, tell us which warrior claimed a piece of your soul, or what destiny you foresee for Snow White and her silent protector. And finally, give this video a like. It is more than a simple click, it is a signal fire in the dark, a vow that stories of passion, sacrifice, and magic deserve to be told. Until the next story calls us to battle, thank you for listening.